Her billionaire husband let his mistress host her charity night. She left without a speech. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The cruelest theft is not when someone takes your place, but when they smiles under your lights and calls your life's work their own. Naomi Brooks learned that truth beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Ellery Hotel, where Manhattan's wealthiest donors floated through the ballroom in silk, diamonds, and practiced kindness. Outside, November rain glazed the streets in silver, blurring the yellow cabs and black town cars into streaks of light, but inside the Gala, everything shimmered with warmth. The tables were dressed in ivory linen. White roses climbed around gold candelabras. A string quartet played softly near the marble staircase, and above the stage, a massive screen displayed the name of the foundation Naomi had built from grief, sacrifice, and 7 years of sleepless devotion, the Brooks Children's Hope Foundation. Tonight was supposed to belong to the children. That was what Naomi told herself as she stood at the ballroom entrance in a simple pearl-white gown, her speech folded carefully in her clutch, her wedding ring cool against her finger. She was 34 years old, elegant in the quiet way that never begged to be noticed. Her deep brown skin glowed under the golden light, and her natural curls were swept back with 2 pearl pins her mother had given her on the day the foundation opened its first pediatric heart clinic in Baltimore. She had chosen the dress not to impress anyone, but because it reminded her of hospital sheets after dawn, clean, hopeful, untouched by despair. For months, she had prepared this night. Every invitation, every donor meeting, every story she planned to tell about mothers driving 6 hours for a consultation, fathers choosing between rent and medication, children too small to understand why their hearts needed help. Her speech was not about her. It was about them. Then she saw the stage. Naomi stopped so suddenly that the guests behind her had to move around her like water around stone. The foundation logo had been pushed to the lower corner of the screen, smaller than before, almost apologetic. Her name, once printed beneath founder and executive director, had been moved to the program's second page. And at the center of the room, laughing beneath the photographer's flashes, stood Celeste Monroe in a silver gown, greeting donors as though she had carried the work in her own hands. Beside her stood Grant Whitmore, Naomi's husband, billionaire chairman of Whitmore Capital, tall, polished, and silent in a black tuxedo that looked less like formal wear than armor. His pale hand rested lightly at Celeste's back, not intimate enough to cause a scandal, but familiar enough to confirm every rumor Naomi had tried not to believe. Celeste lifted a champagne glass and smiled toward the cameras. "Tonight is about compassion," she said, her voice smooth and bright. Grant saw Naomi then. For 1 second, something almost human moved across his face. Shame, perhaps, or inconvenience. Naomi waited for him to cross the room, to explain, to remember that this was not a corporate launch, not a branding opportunity, not another polished lie for investors to applaud. But he stayed where he was. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, and the ballroom softened into silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please welcome the heart behind tonight's charity celebration, Miss Celeste Monroe." The applause rose like a curtain. Naomi looked down at the speech in her hand, the pages marked with careful notes, the final line written beside the name of her little brother, Elijah, who had died before anyone with power had cared enough to listen. Her fingers did not tremble. Her eyes did not fill. She simply closed the speech, placed it on the nearest table, and removed the gold name badge from her chest. Across the ballroom, Grant's expression changed. He knew that look. It was not anger. It was not defeat. It was the quiet moment before a woman remembered she had survived worse than being unloved. Naomi turned toward the exit while the room continued clapping for the wrong woman, and without saying a single word, she walked out of the charity night she had created. The applause followed Naomi into the hallway, softened by the ballroom doors until it became a distant, glittering echo, the sound of people celebrating a story they had not bothered to understand. She walked past the coat check, past the framed photographs of famous guests who had once smiled for the Grand Ellery Hotel, past a wall of mirrors that caught her reflection in fragments. Pearl pins, ivory gown, bare name badge in her hand. For a moment, she saw not the wife of Grant Whitmore, not the woman being erased in real time, but a girl from East Baltimore standing outside a hospital room with vending machine crackers in her pocket and fear pressed into her throat. Naomi had been 15 when her little brother Elijah first complained that running across the schoolyard made his chest hurt. Their mother, Denise Brooks, worked double shifts as a night nurse and still could not get a specialist appointment for 6 weeks. Their father drove a city bus from dawn until after dark, coming home with tired hands and a soft voice, telling Elijah that everything would be all right because fathers were supposed to say things like that, even when the world had given them no proof. Elijah was 8 years old, small for his age, with bright eyes and a laugh that filled their apartment like Sunday morning music. He loved drawing blue houses with red doors, because he said every child should know which door led home. By the time a doctor finally listened carefully enough, his heart had already carried too much silence. Naomi never forgot the waiting room that night, the smell of burnt coffee, the blue plastic chairs, the way her mother's shoes squeaked when she paced the floor. She never forgot how poverty did not shout. It simply delayed, denied, and explained itself in paperwork. Years later, when Naomi earned her degree in public health and began working with pediatric hospitals, she carried Elijah's picture in every folder, every meeting, every grant proposal. She did not want sympathy. She wanted access. She wanted a mother in Mississippi, a father in Ohio, a grandmother in Georgia to hear the words, "We can help," before fear became a funeral prayer. That was how the Brooks Children's Hope Foundation began, not in a penthouse boardroom, but at a borrowed desk in the basement of a community clinic, with a secondhand laptop, 3 volunteers, and a jar of grocery store cookies for families waiting on test results. Grant had met her at a health equity conference in Chicago, where she spoke for 12 minutes about rural hospitals, delayed diagnosis, and children whose zip codes decided the quality of their care. Afterward, he stood in line with everyone else, a billionaire in a Navy suit waiting as if money did not usually move rooms for him. He told her he had never heard anyone make policy sound like love. Back then, Naomi believed him. Back then, Grant listened before he advised. He wrote the first major check, then asked what else she needed. He sat beside her in hospital cafeterias, sleeves rolled up, eating bland turkey sandwiches while she explained insurance gaps and transportation grants. When he proposed 2 years later in a quiet garden behind a children's hospital, he promised he would never make her choose between love and purpose. For a while, he kept that promise. Then the foundation grew. Cameras arrived. Donors arrived. Magazine covers arrived. Grant began speaking of optics, influence, and brand alignment. Naomi spoke of families, surgery dates, and follow-up care. Their arguments did not begin as storms. They began as edits. A changed phrase in a press release. A donor dinner she had not approved. A board seat offered to someone who knew wealth better than compassion. Then came Celeste Monroe, with her silver smile and language polished smooth enough to hide a blade. She called Naomi inspiring, then slowly moved her out of meetings. She praised the mission, then redesigned it to flatter the wealthy. Naomi had seen the shift, but love can make a woman patient long after wisdom has asked her to leave. Now, standing in the hotel hallway while strangers applauded another woman for her life's work, Naomi understood that betrayal rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it is delivered politely, one decision at a time, until the door you built no longer opens for you. Naomi did not leave the hotel immediately. At the end of the hallway, just beyond a pair of French doors that opened toward the service elevators, she stopped beside a narrow table arranged with white lilies and untouched glasses of sparkling water. The ballroom was still breathing behind her, warm with applause and expensive perfume, but the corridor felt colder, almost honest. She rested one hand on the table, not because she was weak, but because dignity sometimes needs one quiet surface to lean on before it stands again. Through the partly open side door, she could still hear Celeste speaking into the microphone, her voice polished and sweet enough to fool anyone who had never watched her rearrange a life with a smile. "This mission has always been close to my heart," Celeste said, and the room answered with soft admiration. Naomi closed her eyes. Those words had been hers. Not close, not borrowed, not inspired by a press packet. Hers. She knew because she had written them at 2 in the morning at the small kitchen table in her Baltimore apartment years before Grant bought the townhouse, before donors learned to pronounce her name, before charity became something people photographed beside floral arrangements. She had written them after visiting a 6-year-old boy in Norfolk whose mother had driven 4 hours in a car with no air conditioning because the nearest pediatric cardiologist was across state lines. Celeste continued, describing a bold new vision and a modern leadership strategy, while Naomi heard the clean theft of language, the careful replacement of care with performance. Then came Grant's voice, low and controlled, close enough now that she opened her eyes. He had followed her. His tuxedo remained perfect, but his expression had thinned around the edges. "Naomi," he said, as if her name were a problem to be managed. She turned slowly. "Did you approve this?" He looked toward the ballroom doors, then back at her. "Not here. That was not my question." His jaw tightened. Celeste understands donor relations. Tonight needed someone who could keep the room focused. The sentence landed quietly, but it carried years inside it. Every time he had suggested she soften her language about poor families. Every time he had warned her not to make wealthy people uncomfortable. Every time he had treated her compassion like a beautiful thing, useful only when framed correctly. Naomi held his gaze. Focused on whom? Grant exhaled, impatient now. On the children, Naomi. This is bigger than your feelings. She almost smiled at the cruelty of that. Not because it was funny, but because it was finally clear. My feelings built this foundation when your friends called it a small passion project. My feelings sat with mothers in waiting rooms. My feelings answered calls at midnight when families could not understand medical bills written like threats. My feelings remembered the names of children your board only counted as outcomes. For the first time, Grant looked away. Behind him, a young assistant appeared with a headset and a clipboard, pale with discomfort. "Mrs. Whitmore," she whispered. "Ms. Monroe is asking for the founder's original remarks. She said the printed version is missing the personal story." Naomi looked down at the folded pages in her clutch. Elijah's name rested inside them like a heartbeat. Grant reached out, not touching her, but expecting obedience from the space between them. "Give her the speech," he said softly. "We can discuss this at home." There it was, the final door closing. Not the affair, not the public humiliation, not even the stolen stage. It was the assumption that even after being erased, she would still provide the words that made the lie sound human. Naomi removed the pages from her clutch and held them for one breath beneath the chandelier light. Then she folded them once more, careful and precise, and slipped them back inside. "No," she said. One word. No performance. No trembling. No explanation for people who had already decided her pain was inconvenient. Grant stared as though she had spoken a language he had forgotten she knew. From inside the ballroom, Celeste laughed gracefully, filling the pause with charm, but outside the doors, the truth had already shifted. Naomi stepped around her husband, walked toward the lobby, and left him standing beneath the lilies with nothing in his hands but the silence he had earned. The lobby of the Grand Ellery Hotel opened before Naomi like a quiet country after war, all polished marble, gold lamps, and fresh orchids arranged for people who never had to wonder whether a hospital bill could empty a kitchen table. Behind her, the ballroom doors swallowed the applause, and for the first time that evening, she heard her own breathing. It was steady. That surprised her. She had imagined betrayal would sound like breaking glass or thunder, something dramatic enough for the heart to understand. Instead, it sounded like the soft click of her heels crossing a floor she no longer wished to stand on. The doorman saw her approaching and straightened with professional concern. "Mrs. Whitmore, would you like your car brought around?" For a moment, Naomi almost said yes. The Blacktown car was waiting somewhere outside, paid for by Grant, driven by a man who would take her back to the penthouse where every painting, every chair, every silver-framed photograph had begun to feel like evidence from someone else's life. She looked through the revolving doors at the November rain shining under the hotel lights. "No, thank you," she said gently. "I will walk for a while." The doorman hesitated, then opened the door without another word, and the cold air touched her face like truth. Manhattan at night moved around her in streams of yellow taxis, dark umbrellas, and headlights reflected in puddles along Fifth Avenue. Naomi stepped beneath the awning and stood still, the speech pressed inside her clutch, the empty place on her gown where her name badge had been catching the wind. She did not cry, not because the pain was small, but because some grief is too deep for tears to reach at first. A small voice behind her said, "Dr. Naomi?" She turned. Near the side entrance stood a little girl in a navy coat. Her hair gathered into two puff ponytails beneath a knitted hat with silver stars. Beside her was her mother, Tasha Reynolds, holding a plastic garment bag and looking as though she had not meant to be seen. Naomi recognized them immediately. Maya Reynolds, 7 years old. Corrective heart surgery 14 months earlier. A child who had once been too tired to climb the stairs to her own apartment and now wrote thank you cards in purple marker with hearts above every letter I. Maya, Naomi said, and her voice softened in a way the ballroom had not deserved. "What are you doing out here, sweetheart?" Tasha's face tightened with embarrassment. "I am sorry. We were asked to use the staff entrance after the photos. They said the donor floor was crowded." Naomi absorbed that quietly. Another small cruelty wrapped in polite language. Maya looked past her toward the ballroom, where Celeste's voice still floated faintly through the walls. "Why did that lady talk instead of you?" The question was innocent, and because it was innocent, it reached deeper than accusation could have. Naomi knelt carefully, ignoring the damp edge of the pavement near her gown. She adjusted Maya's little scarf, tucking it closer beneath her chin. "Sometimes people forget who a story belongs to," Naomi said. "And when they do, you do not have to fight them for the microphone." Maya frowned with the seriousness only children can carry. "But you wrote the story." Naomi smiled, small and sad and strong at once. "Yes, baby, I did." Tasha had lifted her phone without thinking, not to expose, not to perform, but the way mothers record moments their children might need to remember. Naomi saw it and did not stop her. Maya leaned closer. "So why did you leave?" The rain tapped softly on the awning above them. Cars hissed along the curb. Somewhere inside, people were applauding polished words that had never waited beside a hospital bed. Naomi looked into the child's bright, searching eyes and answered with the calmest truth she had left. Because silence can be powerful when speaking would help the wrong people keep pretending. Maya seemed to consider this, then slipped her small hand into Naomi's. "My mom says you helped my heart." Naomi held that tiny hand like it was the only award in the world that mattered. "You helped mine too." By midnight, the video would begin moving across phones, first among nurses, then parents, then donors who had left the gala feeling strangely empty. By morning, no one would remember the silver gown clearly. No one would quote Celeste's perfect phrases. The question spreading across the country would be simple. Why did the woman who built the foundation walk out before saying a word? By sunrise, Naomi's silence had become louder than every speech delivered inside the Grand Ellery Hotel. The video was only 38 seconds long, filmed beneath the awning in soft rain, with Maya's small hand tucked inside Naomi's and Tasha's voice trembling slightly behind the phone. There was no accusation in it, no dramatic music, no caption written for outrage. Just a child asking why the woman who helped her heart had left her own charity night, and Naomi answering with a calm that made the truth feel heavier than anger ever could. Nurses shared it first, then mothers from hospital waiting rooms, then teachers, pastors, pediatric surgeons, and families who remembered Naomi sitting beside them when they had nothing impressive to offer except fear and hope. By 8 o'clock, national morning shows were replaying the clip. By 9, reporters were calling the foundation office. By 10, the question had changed from what happened at the gala to who decided Naomi Brooks no longer belonged at the center of her own work. At the Whitmore penthouse, Grant stood before the wall of windows with his phone in his hand, Manhattan spread beneath him in cold blue light. He had not slept. Celeste had arrived before dawn, still wearing the confidence of someone who believed a crisis could be solved with better language. She placed a folder on the dining table and said, "We need to control the narrative." Grant looked at the screen again. Naomi kneeling in the rain. Maya's face turned up toward her. That sentence. Speaking would help the wrong people keep pretending. It did not sound like a scandal. It sounded like a verdict. Across town, Naomi was not watching television. She was in the old foundation office on West 32nd Street, wearing a navy sweater, her pearl pins set beside her keyboard, answering calls from parents worried their children's appointments would be canceled. The office still smelled faintly of printer paper, coffee, and the crayons children used at the waiting table near the front window. On the wall were drawings from patients, crooked hearts, smiling doctors, blue houses with red doors. Naomi touched one of them gently before picking up the next call. "No, Mrs. Alvarez," she said softly. "Your son's consultation is still scheduled for Thursday. No, you do not need to speak to anyone else. I will make sure the transportation voucher is approved." Her lawyer, Marissa Chun, arrived just before noon with a leather briefcase and the expression of a woman trying to stay professional while furious on someone else's behalf. She laid several documents on Naomi's desk. "You need to see this." Naomi read in silence. 3 days before the gala, Grant had signed an internal restructuring agreement transferring operational control of the Brooks Children's Hope Foundation's donor communications and public programming to Monroe Strategic Events, Celeste's company. The language was polished, almost harmless. Brand continuity, executive efficiency, public engagement strategy. But beneath the soft words, the meaning was unmistakable. Celeste had not simply taken the microphone. Grant had handed her the room before Naomi ever arrived. Marissa's voice was careful. "You can fight this. You have founder protections. You have documentation. You have years of program records. And after last night, the public will listen." Naomi folded the papers back into a neat stack. For a long moment, she looked at Elijah's photograph beside her computer, his smile frozen forever at 8 years old, his front tooth missing, his eyes bright with impossible trust. "I will fight for the children," she said. "I will fight for every family promised care. But I will not turn sick children into weapons against my husband." Marissa sat down slowly, understanding the difference. That afternoon, while Celeste released a statement about unity and modern leadership, Naomi sent one email to every partner, hospital, every social worker, every parent in the program. It contained no mention of betrayal, no mention of Grant, no mention of Celeste, only a promise that their care would continue, their children would not be abandoned, and no family would become collateral damage in an adult failure. At the bottom, she signed her name without titles, without marriage, without fear. Naomi Brooks, founder. For the first time in years, the name looked complete on its own. Naomi left the Whitmore penthouse on a Thursday morning while the city was still pale with dawn. She did not announce it to the press. She did not call a photographer. She did not leave behind a shattered room or a dramatic note for the world to read. She packed 2 suitcases, one small box of letters from children, her mother's pearl pins, and the framed photograph of Elijah that had followed her through every season of becoming. The penthouse was quiet around her, all glass, stone, and expensive silence. For years, she had tried to make it feel like a home, placing fresh flowers near the windows, hanging children's drawings in the private study, leaving books open on tables where Grant preferred only art objects and imported crystal. But standing there with her coat folded over her arm, Naomi understood that a house could be beautiful and still never make room for your soul. Grant appeared near the hallway just as she closed the second suitcase. He wore a white dress shirt, untucked at the waist, his face drawn from sleeplessness. For a moment, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man who had finally discovered that money could not purchase the hour before someone leaves. "Naomi," he said quietly, "you do not have to do this today." She zipped the suitcase with calm precision. "Yes, I do. We can talk. We can bring in advisors. We can repair the foundation structure." Naomi looked at him then, and the softness in her eyes made the truth more painful, not less. "You still think this is about structure?" Grant stepped closer, but stopped when she did not move toward him. "I made a mistake." "No," she said. "A mistake is forgetting a meeting. A mistake is sending the wrong file. What you did required signatures, planning, and the belief that I would be too loyal to object." The words did not rise. They did not need to. In the quiet kitchen behind them, the silver coffee machine clicked off automatically, a small domestic sound in the middle of an ending. Grant's gaze dropped to her wedding ring. "Are you leaving me?" Naomi turned the ring once around her finger, not with bitterness, but with farewell. "I am leaving the version of myself who kept translating disrespect into stress, pressure, or misunderstanding." He had no answer for that. Downstairs, she asked the doorman to call a regular cab instead of the Whitmore car. By noon, Naomi was in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Harlem, loaned to her by Marissa's aunt, a retired school principal who believed women should always have a safe place to think. The apartment had warm wooden floors, radiator heat that clanked in the corners, and a kitchen window overlooking a community garden. It was not grand. It was not silent. It breathed. That evening, Naomi sat on the floor surrounded by folders, hospital contracts, and handwritten cards from families. Outside, children laughed on the sidewalk. Somewhere below, someone was cooking onions and garlic, the smell rising through the old building like memory. She opened a blank document on her laptop and typed the name she had carried in her heart for years, the Elijah Hart Initiative. Not a rebrand, not a replacement, a return. Over the next 3 months, the work became smaller, harder, and more honest. There were no chandeliers, no celebrity hosts, no velvet ropes separating donors from the people they claimed to serve. A church in Queens donated office space 2 days a week. A bakery in Brooklyn held a weekend fundraiser and sent a check for $682. A retired cardiologist in New Jersey volunteered for telehealth screenings. Nurses gave $10, $20, whatever they could. Mothers who once received help now offered rides to families without cars. Each small act arrived without applause, and somehow that made it sacred. Naomi learned again what Grant had forgotten. Charity was not built by powerful people standing on stages. It was built by ordinary people refusing to let strangers suffer alone. By the end of the 3rd month, 18 children had received consultations, 7 had completed surgery, and every one of them had a follow-up plan written in language their families could understand. On the same morning Naomi signed the last discharge support form, Marissa called with news. State regulators had opened an inquiry into the old foundation's financial restructuring, and several major hospitals had suspended their partnership with Grant and Celeste pending review. Naomi listened in silence, then looked across the room at Elijah's photograph beside a vase of grocery store daisies. She did not smile at their fall. She only whispered, "Keep the children safe." And then she returned to work. The inquiry did not arrive like thunder. It arrived as an email, then a phone call, then a quiet sentence spoken by a hospital administrator who had once shaken Grant Whitmore's hand beneath a wall of cameras and now would not return his messages. Partnerships were suspended pending review. Donor funds were temporarily frozen. Public programming under Monroe Strategic Events was paused until auditors could determine why a Children's Health Foundation had paid unusually high consulting fees to a company owned by the woman who had taken over its gala stage. Grant read the reports in his office at Whitmore Capital, where the skyline that once made him feel untouchable now looked distant and indifferent through 47 floors of glass. Around him, advisors spoke in careful corporate language, reputational exposure, compliance concerns, governance failure, but every phrase translated into the same truth. He had treated Naomi's life work like an asset, and now the asset had found a conscience without him. Celeste refused to accept it at first. She arrived at meetings in flawless cream suits, her smile still bright, her voice still trained to smooth sharp edges. "This is a misunderstanding," she told the board. "Naomi is emotional, and the public has romanticized her departure." But the room had changed. Men and women who once laughed at her clever remarks now studied spreadsheets instead of her face. A retired judge on the foundation board asked why Monroe Strategic Events had billed $12,000 for donor storytelling strategy when the original stories had been written by Naomi years before. A pediatric surgeon asked why families had been removed from the main guest list and redirected through a service entrance. Celeste's smile held for 1 second too long, then began to disappear. Grant watched it happen with a strange emptiness. Months earlier, he might have defended her. He might have said the optics were complicated or that Naomi never understood how the world of power worked. But every defense sounded smaller now beside the image he could not escape. Naomi in the rain, kneeling before Maya Reynolds, giving a child more truth in 38 seconds than he had given his wife in years. The fall of his perfect image was not dramatic enough for cameras. It was worse. It was administrative, documented, signed, and undeniable. Hospitals withdrew quietly. Donors requested independent oversight. A children's advocacy group released a public letter praising Naomi's new initiative and urging all charitable organizations to protect mission leadership from private influence. Whitmore Capital's stock did not collapse, but it trembled enough for shareholders to notice. At home, or what used to be home, Grant walked through rooms Naomi had softened with flowers and books, rooms now returned to their expensive coldness. Her absence had a shape. It lived in the empty chair near the window where she used to review patient files. It lived in the missing drawings she had taken from the study wall. It lived in the kitchen cabinet where her favorite tea was still waiting, untouched, as if loyalty could expire on a shelf. One Friday afternoon, Grant went to Naomi's Harlem office without calling first. The Elijah Hart Initiative occupied 2 rooms above a neighborhood pharmacy, with a hand-painted sign by the stairwell and a waiting area full of mismatched chairs. There was no marble, no publicist, no wall of awards. Just a volunteer helping a father complete a transportation form, a nurse explaining medication instructions in plain English, and Naomi at a folding table with her sleeves pushed to her elbows, reviewing a surgical follow-up schedule. She looked up when the room grew quiet. Grant felt every eye measure him, not with hatred, but with the guarded wisdom of people who knew how often power arrived pretending to help. Naomi stood. "We can speak outside." On the sidewalk, afternoon light rested on her face with a peace that unsettled him. "I am sorry," he said. The words came too quickly, shaped by panic more than understanding. "I did not know it would go this far." Naomi's expression did not harden. It simply became clear. "You knew enough to sign the papers." He swallowed. "I thought I was protecting the foundation." "No," she said. "You were protecting your comfort. You wanted my work, my silence, and my name, but not my voice." A city bus sighed at the curb. Somewhere behind them, a child laughed upstairs. Grant looked toward the window where a paper heart was taped to the glass, crooked and red. "What can I do?" he asked. Naomi reached into her folder and handed him a list. 18 children, 7 surgeries, 11 pending cases, names, dates, hospitals, real lives that did not care about his regret unless it became useful. "Start by remembering they are not your redemption story," she said. "They are children. Help them without standing in front of them." Grant looked down at the list, and for the first time, no camera was there to make his remorse look noble. 6 months after the night Naomi walked out of the Grand Ellery Hotel, she stood behind a curtain at the National Pediatric Health Equity Summit in Washington, D.C., listening to the quiet thunder of nearly 2,000 people settling into their seats. The convention hall was not as glamorous as the ballroom had been. There were no crystal chandeliers, no champagne towers, no photographers asking people to tilt their faces toward better light. There were rows of physicians, nurses, social workers, nonprofit directors, parents, students, and policymakers, people whose shoes had crossed hospital floors more often than red carpets. Naomi wore a deep blue dress with a simple neckline and her mother's pearl pins holding back her curls. In her hands was not the speech from the gala. That one remained folded in a box beside Elijah's photograph. Today's pages were new, written at her Harlem kitchen table between patient calls, transportation approvals, and thank you notes from children learning how to run without fear. Marissa stood near the side wall, smiling with the fierce pride of a friend who had watched a woman rebuild without asking the world for permission. Tasha and Maya Reynolds sat in the third row. Maya wore a red cardigan and waved with both hands when she saw Naomi peek through the curtain. Naomi pressed her palm to her heart and smiled. Then she noticed Grant. He sat near the back, alone, in a plain charcoal suit, without Celeste, without assistance, without the polished shield of importance that once entered rooms before he did. He did not approach her. He did not send a note. He simply sat there with a program in his hands, looking less like a man waiting to be forgiven and more like one trying to understand what forgiveness should never be asked to carry. Celeste was gone from public view by then. Monroe Strategic Events had lost its largest clients after the audit findings were released, and the foundation Grant had been placed under independent oversight. The headlines had been sharp for a few weeks, then moved on, the way headlines always do. But the families remembered. The hospitals remembered. Naomi remembered, not with bitterness, but with the clear memory of a lesson paid for indignity. When her name was announced, the applause began before she reached the podium. Naomi walked into it slowly, not as someone rescued by public sympathy, but as someone who had continued working long after the sympathy faded. She looked out over the hall and waited until the room settled into silence. For a brief second, she thought of the microphone she had refused to fight for, the one Celeste had held beneath borrowed lights. Then she looked at Maya, at the doctors who had volunteered on weekends, at the mothers who had turned their own survival into service, and she began. When people speak about charity, they often speak about generosity, Naomi said, her voice steady and warm. But generosity is not enough if it still allows one person to stand above another. A hungry family does not need to be displayed. A sick child does not need to become someone's public relations moment. A frightened parent does not need pity dressed in expensive language. What they need is access, respect, and systems built by people willing to listen before they lead. The room remained completely still. Naomi did not mention Grant. She did not mention Celeste. She did not retell her humiliation for applause. She spoke about rural families driving 200 miles for care, about medical forms written beyond the understanding of exhausted parents, about the quiet heroism of nurses who stayed late to explain what institutions should have made clear from the beginning. Then she paused, turning one page with careful hands. Charity is not a performance, she said. It is a promise. And promises should never be handed to people who only love applause. The sentence moved through the hall like light through stained glass. In the back row, Grant lowered his eyes. Not because she had exposed him, but because she had not needed to. Naomi continued, stronger now, her voice carrying the weight of every child who had once waited too long to be seen. When she finished, the audience rose to its feet. The sound was not glittering like the Gala. It was deeper, human, earned. Naomi stepped away from the podium and looked once toward the back of the room. Grant was standing too, clapping with everyone else. But this time he was not beside the woman on stage. He was simply one face in a crowd finally learning how to listen. After the summit, Naomi did not wait near the podium for praise. She thanked the organizers, hugged Maya and Tasha, accepted a stack of handwritten notes from nursing students, and stepped into the cool evening outside the convention center with the same quiet grace she had carried through every room that tried to misunderstand her. Washington, D.C., glowed beneath the last gold of sunset, the flags along the avenue moving gently in the wind. Marissa walked beside her for a while, then stopped when she saw Grant standing near the stone steps, hands folded in front of him, not blocking Naomi's path, not asking the world to witness his regret. "I can wait by the car," Marissa said. Naomi nodded. Grant approached slowly, as if he had finally learned that not every distance was his to close. "Your speech was beautiful," he said. Naomi looked at him with calm eyes. It was honest. He accepted the correction. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Traffic moved beyond the curb. A group of students passed by laughing, their conference badges swinging from blue lanyards, already carrying pieces of Naomi's words into lives she would never see. Grant reached into his coat pocket and removed a folder. "The divorce papers are signed. I also transferred the remaining funds I controlled into an independent trust for pediatric care. No Whitmore branding. No press release. No conditions." Naomi took the folder, but she did not open it. "That is good." His face tightened with the pain of a man who wanted those 3 words to become a bridge and knew they were only a receipt. "I am sorry, Naomi. Not because I lost you. Because I made you feel like your voice was something I could manage." The apology stood between them, late but finally shaped like truth. Naomi let it breathe there. Then she said, "I believe you are sorry. I also believe some doors should stay closed even after the person on the other side learns how to knock." Grant's eyes lowered. He did not argue. That was the first respectful thing his regret had done. Weeks later, the legal ending arrived quietly. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no public victory lap, no interview where Naomi turned sorrow into entertainment. She signed the final papers in Marissa's office, removed the last version of Whitmore from her legal documents, and walked outside feeling not empty, but light. The Elijah Hart initiative kept growing, not because of scandal, but because trust had roots deeper than fame. By spring, the little office above the pharmacy had moved into a renovated community health center with 6 consultation rooms, a family resource library, and a wall painted with blue houses and red doors in honor of Elijah's childhood drawings. On opening morning, children placed paper hearts along the hallway while parents wrote messages of thanks on a canvas near the entrance. Naomi stood before them, not beneath chandeliers, but under fluorescent lights softened by handmade paper stars. She thought of the gala speech still folded in its box, the one she had never given. That evening, after the last family left, she took it out and read only the final line. Let every child be seen before it is too late. Then she placed the pages beside Elijah's photograph in a drawer, not as a wound, but as a witness. Outside, dawn-colored streetlights flickered on, and somewhere down the hall, a boy after surgery laughed because he had beaten a nurse at checkers. Naomi smiled, closed the drawer, and returned to the sound of living children. Her story leaves us with a simple truth. Respect is not a luxury reserved for the wealthy, powerful, or admired. It is the ground every human being deserves to stand on. Real love does not erase, control, or borrow another person's voice for applause. Real kindness protects people when no camera is watching. And when betrayal tries to make dignity look like silence, a strong heart can turn that silence into a beginning, not an end.